High in the hush of a deep green forest, there stands a tower. It is tall and round, with no door at its base, and ivy trailing up its ancient stones like nature's own lullaby. Wind moves gently through the trees, their branches weaving a soft rustle in the canopy. Sunlight filters through the leaves in golden flecks, dancing across moss and wildflowers. In this stillness, above the ground and away from the world, there is a single window, and from it, long strands of golden hair spill like light turned to silk. Somewhere inside, a voice hums, gentle, drifting, carrying a melody as delicate as a dream. The forest listens. So do we. Welcome to Sleepy Journeys, the podcast designed to lull you into a peaceful slumber with soothing stories through time, places, and ideas. Whether you're winding down after a long day or simply looking for a peaceful escape, you're in the right place. My name's Jack, and I'm so happy to have you here with me. Each night on Sleepy Journeys, we set off together on gentle adventures designed to soothe your mind and ease you into rest. You'll find journeys through history, comforting fairy tales, myths and folklore, the wonders of science, fascinating inventions, inspiring famous figures, music history, and even calm explorations around the world. No matter where your curiosity takes you, there's a dreamy Sleepy Journeys show for you. Tonight, we'll drift slowly into the soft and wistful tale of Rapunzel. And just before we fully drift off, if you're enjoying Sleepy Journeys, go ahead and tap follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're joining me on. That way, you won't miss any of our upcoming sleepy adventures. And let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us. Now, take a deep breath and let's begin. Imagine a faraway land where trees grow tall and thick, their trunks worn smooth with age, their roots tangled beneath soft earth. The world is quieter here, held gently beneath layers of green. Time moves more slowly in this place, and the light is always a little golden, as if the sun is paused in a long, kind afternoon. Nestled between groves and glades is a garden walled in stone. Beyond it, a village slumbers softly, smoke rising from chimneys, chickens clucking low in shaded corners, and windows open to the breeze. Here lives a couple, humble and kind, their small home filled with quiet routines and dreams whispered into pillows at night. The wife, with a round belly and a far-off look in her eyes, gazes from her window into the garden each morning. There, behind twisted vines and brambles, grow the greenest leaves, the most delicate herbs. Among them, a plant with curling tendrils and purple blossoms, lush and tempting in the sun's gentle light. She sees it, and something stirs within her, a wish so quiet it barely rises above a breath. Yet it grows, slowly and surely, curling like a sprout toward the warmth. Her husband watches her with love and worry, sensing the deepening pull of that simple craving. A longing born from yearning, for fullness, for peace, for something just out of reach. And so begins the soft weaving of our tale. It is a story of wishes and towers, of songs drifting through treetops and the slow, certain unfolding of change. A story of hair like gold and hearts like candlelight. Of voices that echo in the stillness and the quiet strength found in waiting. Close your eyes now, if they haven't already, Let the sound of leaves and the hush of stone walls carry you inward. The forest is still. The tower waits. The journey into this old, soft story begins. In a quiet corner of a quiet village, where rooftops sloped gently beneath the weight of moss and time, there stood a small cottage. Its shutters were always just slightly open to the breeze, and its garden, though modest, bloomed with love. A well with a wooden bucket stood just beside the back door, and each morning, the sound of water being drawn echoed softly through the stone lane like a bell's gentle chime. The couple who lived there had grown old together in spirit, though their faces still held the softness of youth. They rose with the sun and moved through their days with practiced ease, tending to the hearth, feeding the chickens, folding linens scented by sunlight. Their home was filled with the kind of quiet that speaks of contentment, and their lives, though simple, were deeply rooted. Yet just beyond the reach of their yard, past a crumbling boundary wall wrapped in ivy and shadow, lay another garden, one far more wild and secret. It belonged to no neighbor, and no one could recall who had last tended it. The stone wall that enclosed it was high and unwelcoming, with only a single iron gate, long rusted shut. But if one stood near the hedge and looked just right, they might catch a glimpse through the brambles of green that shimmered more brightly than any common leaf, of vines twisted in elegant spirals, of flowers and shades the sky had barely learned. The woman would often pause at her window in the early morning hours, her hands resting gently on her growing belly, her gaze drawn again and again to the distant patch of color just beyond the wall. She didn't know the name of the plant that had caught her eye, a curious herb with tender leaves and purple veined stems, but the sight of it sparked something in her chest. A soft hunger, strange and quiet, like a note held at the edge of a song. Her dreams began to fill with it. Long walks among the curling stalks, the feel of dew on her fingertips, the scent of something green and clean. When she awoke, the craving still lingered, light but insistent, like a wish that had taken root. The man, seeing her pale cheeks and distant gaze, began to worry. He sat beside her each evening, his calloused hands folded over hers, and listened as she spoke of the plant behind the wall. She wondered aloud what it might taste like, what it might mean to touch something so bright. The garden beyond the wall had always seemed unreachable. But as dusk fell and lanterns glowed golden in the village windows, a new thought began to settle in the husband's mind. A thought born of love, of care, of what might grow from a single, quiet risk. And in that hush, a decision began to take shape, like a path gently unfolding beneath the feet. In the days that followed, the craving gently deepened, like ripples expanding across a still pond. The woman, though always kind and soft-spoken, seemed wrapped in a quiet haze. Her movements remained slow and steady, yet her thoughts were often elsewhere, in the rustle of wind through unseen leaves, in the imagined scent of something just beyond reach. She would pause mid-task, her fingers resting on a piece of cloth or a wooden spoon, her eyes distant, as if hearing a sound only she could understand. Her dreams became more vivid. She saw the garden clearly now, vines curling like ribbons across cool earth, flowers opening with the rhythm of breath, stems bending gently in a breeze that smelled of wild sweetness. The mysterious plant, which she came to call Rapunzel, though she knew not why, appeared again and again. In sleep, she gathered it with care, cradling the leaves in her apron, her heart filled with a calm, full joy. Each morning, she awoke with a whisper of that joy, only to feel its absence like a small hollow in her chest. Her husband noticed. He always did. He read her silences as well as her words. Each day, he saw the longing deepen in her eyes, quietly insistent. A longing that had become part of her breath. At night, she would lie awake for long minutes, one hand resting gently on her growing belly. She did not speak, but he could feel her thoughts beside him, a soft yearning that filled the room like moonlight. He held her hand beneath the blanket and traced small circles across her knuckles. And as he watched her eyelids slowly lower, a decision settled gently upon him. The next evening, after the sun had slipped beneath the hills and the village lamps flickered one by one into life, he pulled on his cloak and stepped softly outside. The air was still, the earth damp beneath his boots, and overhead the stars blinked awake in the deepening blue. He walked quietly past houses closed against the night, through the narrow lanes where ivy curled between stones, until he stood once more before the high garden wall. It looked as it always had, ancient, silent, and closed. But this time, he listened differently. He felt the air near it, heard the low hum of wind across leaves, smelled the faintest sweetness. A rusted gate, thought long sealed, yielded with effort and care. And then, with a breath held deep, he stepped through. Inside, the garden seemed to exhale. The plants shimmered in the starlight, and the air held a warmth, as if it remembered the sun. Carefully, gently, he found the plant she had described, its leaves dewy and soft, its scent mild and strangely comforting. He gathered just a handful and slipped back into the night. And when she awoke the next morning, her smile was small and wordless, but it filled the room like a sunrise. Beyond the garden and beyond the village, deep within the folds of an ancient forest, there stood a tower so tall and so secluded that few believed it real. No path led to it. No road passed nearby. Trees wrapped it in their arms, oaks, birches, and pines growing in slow spirals around its stone base. Moss carpeted the ground, and vines climbed freely toward its upper stones. It rose like a column from the earth, its surface weathered by wind and rain, its windows few and narrow, like slits carved into memory. There was no door at its base, no stairway winding up the outside. Only a single window, high above the forest floor, open to the sky. It faced the morning sun and caught the light just as the world began to stir. From this high place, the sound of birdsong rose early and lingered long. Inside the tower, the light spilled across a round room with smooth stone walls and a wooden floor worn soft by time. A simple bed stood beneath the window, its linens white and neatly tucked. Beside it, a small table held a jug of water and a comb carved from bone. The room was filled with quiet details, woven rugs, polished shelves, dried herbs hanging in bunches, and a flute that rested beside a stack of well-worn books. The air was touched with the scent of lavender and something faintly sweet, like crushed apple leaves. This was Rapunzel's world, her sky-bound chamber among the trees. She had lived there as long as she could remember. The days passed with a rhythm all their own, marked by sunlight on the stone and shadows on the floor. She rose with the birds, combed her hair with care, and watered the small pots of herbs growing along the windowsill. She read, sang, and watched the leaves dance far below. Her hair was her most remarkable feature, long, golden, and shining with the softness of silk. It flowed like a waterfall down her back, sweeping the floor and curling into quiet spirals. She brushed it gently each morning, working slowly through the strands, her hands moving with practiced grace. When the sun caught it, it glowed, casting golden light across the chamber walls. She knew the voice of the woman who came and went, the one who brought her food and tidied the shelves. This woman, older and shrouded in long cloaks, never climbed stairs or passed through a door. Instead, she called from below, and Rapunzel, without fear, would let her long hair down the side of the tower, anchoring it on a beam. The older woman would rise as if lifted by memory itself, and the window would welcome her like a door. Rapunzel's days were filled with stillness. She did not long for more, for she did not know what else the world could offer. Her chamber held light and quiet, softness and song. The forest, visible through the narrow window, swayed and whispered its stories far below, and Rapunzel listened, calm and content in her chamber in the sky. Each day, as the sun arched slowly across the sky, Rapunzel filled her quiet tower with song. Her voice was soft and clear, like water slipping over stones, rising gently through the open window and drifting down into the trees below. She sang with a natural impulse to let sound move through silence. The melodies were old, shaped by memory and instinct, sweetened by solitude and sky. Her songs were simple, slow, lullabies spun from fragments of stories she had read, from rhymes half remembered, from the hum of the forest and the rhythms of her breath. Sometimes she sang as she brushed her long hair, the strokes of the comb keeping time. Other times she sat by the window with her eyes closed, her feet tucked beneath her, and let the melodies rise like mist. The birds knew her voice. They often gathered near the tower's stone ledge, tilting their heads and fluttering lightly as her notes drifted outward. A pair of doves nested just beyond the window frame, their soft coos blending with her verses. Small sparrows and blue tits danced on the ivy vines, resting for long moments before taking flight again. Even the trees seemed to respond. Leaves shimmered in the light, their undersides catching gold, and the breeze carried her voice far and wide. Rapunzel's songs changed with the hours. In the morning, they were bright and lilting, full of freshness and awakening. By afternoon, they slowed, becoming warm and steady, like the drowsy hum of summer. And in the evening, her voice turned to hush and hush alone, long, low tones that wrapped around the fading light, drawing it gently toward twilight. She never wondered if anyone heard her. The singing was for herself, a way to touch the world beyond her stone walls. A bridge built from breath. Yet far below, where moss softened the forest floor, ears sometimes did catch her voice. Travelers, wandering lost or resting on a fallen tree, would pause and tilt their heads. A melody unlike any they knew, too clear to be imagined, too gentle to be feared. In one such moment, a figure moved quietly through the underbrush. He was young, his cloak worn, a lute strapped across his back. The prince, traveling without title, had heard stories of the forest tower, but never sought it out. Yet the voice he heard now held him still, as if a thread had been spun from window to woodland and tied around his chest. He stood beneath the trees and listened. The song filled the air around him like perfume. He stayed, letting each note settle into him like snow on the shoulders of a coat. And far above, unaware of the listener below, Rapunzel sang on, her voice steady, her gaze soft, her spirit full. The forest wrapped itself in stillness as the prince lingered beneath the canopy. He did not yet know the name of the voice that had found him, nor the story behind the tower that rose like a secret from the ground. But he returned. Each visit was quiet, his footsteps soft among fallen leaves, his breath measured with care. He came in the early morning at first, while mist clung to the trees and dew painted each blade of grass. The birds had not yet begun their songs, and the forest was hushed, as if listening. He would sit upon a moss-covered stone and wait, letting his thoughts wander as the light filtered through the branches. And then, just as the day began to brighten, her voice would rise, slow, thoughtful, curling into the air like smoke from a candle. Day after day, he returned. Not always close and never seen. He did not wish to startle or disturb, only to hear. He began to hum along, catching the rise and fall of her melodies. He traced her voice in sketches on worn parchment, of trees shaped by music, of towers made of song. He brought offerings, though he never left them where she might notice. Small things, a sprig of lavender laid gently on a rock, a feather placed beside the ivy. He did not know if she saw them. He only knew that it felt right to give something back to a voice that gave so freely. One day, as the sunlight sharpened into gold and the air grew fragrant with the turning season, he ventured closer. He stepped through thickets with care, his boots barely touching the ground. He reached the edge of the tower's clearing and stood among the shadows, looking up. There she was, a figure in the window, framed by vines and sky, her hair a golden river down the stone. She faced outward, her song rising softly, her eyes far away. The prince stayed very still. When she finished, she turned slightly, as if sensing the shift in the forest. A breeze passed, stirring the ivy, and for a moment, her gaze swept downward. Their eyes did not meet. But something moved between them, something quieter than words, the first faint note of a connection beginning to form. The prince stepped back, not wanting to linger too long. He walked away with the same softness he had brought, his heart carrying the shape of her voice like a melody tucked into the pocket of his coat. That night, beneath a wide sky littered with stars, he looked up and smiled. He did not yet know her name. But the tower no longer seemed like a mystery. It felt instead like a chapter just beginning to open. The prince returned with each passing day, his visits forming a quiet rhythm that matched the pulse of the forest. He no longer stayed hidden in the underbrush. Instead, he stepped softly into the clearing and looked up, waiting patiently by the ivy-wrapped base of the tower. Rapunzel, curious now, watched for him from her high window. She had noticed him first as a figure in the shadows, then as a presence more familiar than strange. One morning, when the light fell in dappled golden pools and the forest shimmered with dew, she found the courage to speak. Her voice, always used in song, reached downward in simple greeting. The prince looked up with calm eyes and smiled. He simply said, "Good morning," as one would to a friend met by chance beneath the trees. Their conversation was halting at first, separated as they were by height and habit. She asked about the world, the rivers he had seen, the roads he had traveled. He asked about her tower, the herbs in her windowsill, the view from her stone ledge. In time, the exchange grew easier. They shared stories and questions, bits of song and laughter that rose and fell like birds among the branches. Rapunzel told him of her books, her flute, her dreams of clouds that tasted like sugar and forests made of glass. He listened with gentle attention, giving space for her words to bloom. In return, he spoke of open skies and quiet towns, of festivals where lanterns drifted into the air like stars learning to rise. Their conversations unfolded slowly, without urgency. There was no plan, no promise, and a bond took root, quiet and steady, like a sapling growing beneath layers of fallen leaves. One afternoon, when the breeze carried the scent of pine and rain, the prince asked how she came and went from her tower. She laughed softly and said, "I don't. I have always been here." And then, with a pause, she added, "But I'm not lonely." It wasn't sadness in her voice, but something more thoughtful, a softness shaped by solitude. The prince understood. He did not pity her. He only said, "Your voice makes the forest kinder." And with that, a silence fell between them, deep and full, like the hush after music. Over time, Rapunzel began to wait for the sound of his boots on the forest floor, and he, for the sight of her hair catching light like woven gold. They were two lives, shaped differently, finding harmony in the space between. Neither rushed to name what was growing between them. They simply returned each day, hearts slowly unfurling like leaves in spring, warmed by the presence of someone who saw them truly. The days continued with their gentle rhythm, each one unfolding like the petals of a flower, slow, soft, familiar. Rapunzel's songs carried new tones now, colored by something warm and blooming in her chest. The prince came often, and his visits left the air inside her chamber feeling brighter. She did not speak of him to the woman who climbed her hair, the one she had known all her life. The moments in the forest felt like something fragile, something still forming. The woman, cloaked always in dark fabric, came as she always had, rising with a whispered call and a tug at the braid. She entered the tower with arms full of bread and linen, checking shelves, murmuring spells, wiping dust with long, practiced strokes. Her presence carried weight. She watched Rapunzel with an eye that missed little. And though she spoke with calm words, her voice held the shape of secrets and endings. It was one afternoon, as the shadows of the trees grew long and the scent of dusk settled in, that the shift occurred. The woman had been quiet, more so than usual, as she stirred broth over the fire and set the chamber to rights. Rapunzel sat on the window seat, brushing her hair and humming absently, her thoughts full of the prince's most recent story, a tale of a blue lake that reflected the stars so clearly it seemed the sky had fallen into it. "You've been humming often lately," the woman said without looking up. Her tone was neutral, yet something in it paused the air. Rapunzel smiled to herself and replied, "I've had lovely thoughts to hum about." The woman turned, slow and deliberate. And what thoughts would those be? Rapunzel hesitated. The pause was brief, but the woman felt it. "Just dreams," Rapunzel said softly, "the kind you think about in the quiet." The woman stepped closer. Her fingers brushed Rapunzel's hair, smoothing a strand behind her ear. Her touch was light, but her eyes were sharp. "Tell me, my girl, how is it that your dress seems tighter these days? Have you been eating more? Or perhaps something else has changed?" A chill passed through the chamber. Rapunzel blinked, surprised, uncertain. She lowered the brush slowly. And then, as if a thread had been pulled too tight, the moment unraveled. Questions spilled into the room, quiet at first, then firmer. The woman's voice, still even, grew heavier with each word. She searched the chamber with her gaze, found a second wooden comb where only one had been, a folded slip of paper tucked beneath the herbs. Nothing dramatic, but enough. The tower no longer felt like safety. It felt like something watched. Rapunzel's answers came gently, honestly. And when the truth settled fully between them, the woman's silence was louder than any storm. She turned without another word, gathered her cloak, and descended swiftly from the window. And above, in the hush that followed, Rapunzel sat very still, her hands resting on her lap, the brush fallen to the floor, and the sun slowly leaving the sky. The morning came softly, but with an edge. The birds still sang, the leaves still whispered, but the forest seemed to hold its breath. Rapunzel awoke to silence beyond her window, no gentle call, no weight tugging at her braid, no familiar voice rising from the base of the tower. She stood, wrapped her shawl across her shoulders, and waited. But the wind brought only stillness. Then, a rustle. A figure in the clearing. The prince, early, hopeful, looking up toward her window with a quiet smile. Rapunzel's heart lifted. She leaned out, her braid coiled in her arms, ready to lower it, to begin again. But before she could speak, another voice rose. The woman's voice, cold and sharp, sliced through the air like winter wind. She stepped from the shadows of the trees, her cloak flaring like smoke. The prince paused mid-step, startled. She raised her hand, and with words not spoken aloud, summoned a force that coiled through the clearing like shadowed thread. There was only a flicker, a shimmer of dark air, and the prince fell, drawn into silence. He staggered backward, his feet tangled in roots, his body cradled by moss and stone. His eyes closed. The forest took him in. Above, Rapunzel's hands trembled. She called out his name once, twice. The woman did not look up. With a sweep of her hand, the tower spun. Light bent. Wind rose. And Rapunzel felt her feet leave the floor, her breath catch in her throat. The chamber blurred. The forest was gone. When she awoke, she lay among trees, but not the ones she knew. These were wilder, softer, filled with the songs of birds she could not name. The tower was nowhere in sight. Around her, wildflowers grew in thick, fragrant clusters. The earth beneath her was soft and warm, and above her, the sky held no trace of stone. She was alone. She sat quietly, her hand resting on the ground, her hair spread out like a blanket. She listened, and in the hush of the forest, she heard her own breath, slow and steady, a rhythm that was still hers. Days passed. She found a stream. She made shelter beneath low-hanging branches. She sang again, because singing helped the world feel less silent. Her voice changed. It grew stronger, deeper. It wound through the trees like a thread of light. Far away, in another part of the forest, the prince wandered. The fall had left him blinded, his vision dark. But he moved forward still, guided by the memory of her voice. He listened to the wind, to the birds, to the low hush of leaves. And in time, the forest became familiar. They were two souls now apart, walking the same world, held in the same breath. And though they could not yet see each other, their paths were gently drawing closer with each passing step. The forest that now cradled Rapunzel was not the same one that once wrapped around her tower. It was wider here, wilder, with trees spaced far enough apart for the sun to settle in golden patches on the forest floor. Ferns unfurled like quiet dancers, and flowers sprang up in delicate constellations, dotting the underbrush in pinks, whites, and soft blues. Everything felt soft-edged, slower, as if the world itself had chosen to move at her pace. Rapunzel moved with that same rhythm. No longer bound to the stone circle high above the trees, she walked freely beneath branches that sang with wind and birds. Her feet, once accustomed to the feel of wooden planks and braided rugs, now touched earth and moss. She stepped carefully at first, finding her balance among roots and rain-washed stones. But the forest welcomed her. It offered paths worn by deer, shelter beneath boughs, and a stream that glittered even in the shade. She found a hollow in a sunlit glade, a quiet dip in the land ringed with birch and elm, and there she began to make her home. She cleared leaves, laid down branches, and gathered herbs. She wove grasses into mats, shaped branches into lean-tos, and let her days unfold without fear. The solitude was different now. It was chosen, not imposed. Each moment held the shape of freedom in the rustle of trees overhead, the lapping of water nearby, the sky above always open and vast. Rapunzel sang still, but her songs had changed. They were lower now, deeper, warmed by new experience. Her melodies wove together everything she saw, the curved wings of hawks, the way pine needles glistened after rain, the scent of sun-warmed bark. Animals visited often. A doe with cautious eyes lingered at the edge of her glade. A fox passed quietly, leaving paw prints in soft earth. Birds alighted on nearby branches and listened. They were fellow dwellers in the calm. And as days lengthened into weeks, Rapunzel began to feel something return, a sense of belonging to the world itself. She tended wildflowers like old friends. She hummed as she walked the same path each morning, gathering berries, dipping her feet into the stream. The tower faded in her mind, like a distant dream. She no longer woke expecting stone above her. She no longer waited for the call from below. She slept with the stars as her ceiling and the wind as her lullaby, wrapped in a quiet she had made her own. Each breath, each step was her own, and in that, she found something deeper than she had ever known in her high chamber. In the forest, among wildflowers and fern, Rapunzel bloomed. The prince wandered through the forest patiently. Though the light no longer reached his eyes, the forest around him became his guide. He learned the rhythm of each path, where the moss grew thickest, where branches dipped low, where the wind always sang in the same soft key. He moved slowly, listening with his whole being. The sounds of the forest became his compass. The flutter of birds told him where to step lightly. The flow of streams told him which way was downhill. And the wind carried voices from far away, wrapped in memory and hope. Each night, he sat beside a tree and remembered the songs. He held every note of her voice in his mind. He hummed her melodies under his breath, letting them guide him onward, one step, one day at a time. Rapunzel, in her glade, often sang in the evening. She did not know why the wind felt different as the sun dipped low, but something in her heart told her to lift her voice to the sky. The songs were soft and longing, full of warmth. They drifted between branches and echoed off the bark of old trees. And one day, a breeze carried her voice to someone who had been listening all along. The prince paused where he stood, deep among the trees. His heart quickened. He turned toward the sound, unsure but hopeful. With slow, deliberate steps, he moved in the direction of the song, following it by memory. It wound through the forest like a thread of gold, and he followed. At the edge of her glade, Rapunzel felt something shift. She looked up, and her voice caught in her throat. A figure, tall and quiet, stepped into the clearing. His clothes were worn, his face unshaven, his eyes closed, but his hands reached out gently, and on his face was a look she knew as surely as her own reflection. She ran to him without hesitation. Her arms wrapped around him like light meeting shadow. He whispered her name, and the wind hushed to listen. And as tears fell, hers soft and bright, his like rain after drought, she touched his face and gently kissed his eyes. The forest held its breath. When he opened them again, the world was no longer dark. It was full of light, full of her golden hair, her warm hands, her smile that rose like dawn. He saw her for the first time as he had always known her, as light made into form. They sat together for a long time, hands entwined, silence wrapped around them like a blanket. No words were needed. They had found each other again, through song and wind and quiet hope. And in that clearing, among the wild flowers and trees, healing began, slow, steady, full of peace. The forest, once a maze of mystery and quiet discovery, now felt like a companion walking beside them. As Rapunzel and the prince made their way through its winding paths, each step was taken with unspoken agreement. They moved slowly, without hurry, savoring the hush that wrapped around their days. There were no questions about where to go, only a sense that the journey was unfolding as it should. The birds watched them from branches above, their calls gentle, as if offering soft encouragement. The foxes and deer, once wary, now appeared without fear, moving silently through the underbrush as the couple passed. The trees swayed with each breeze, whispering above them like old friends sharing secrets. Rapunzel carried a small satchel of herbs she had gathered, rosemary, thyme, a few wild blossoms she couldn't name. The prince held her hand more than he used his walking stick, trusting her steps, trusting the feel of her presence beside him. The trail led them gradually out of the forest's deep heart and toward the open lands beyond, sun-drenched meadows and the soft rise and fall of familiar hills. The kingdom they approached had changed in their absence. The people had spoken in low voices of a young prince lost to the woods, of a girl with hair like sunlight who had vanished into myth. But as the gates came into view, no horn sounded. There were no declarations, no processions, just the quiet clop of their footsteps and the warmth of the morning light on the road. At the edge of the village, a shepherd paused in his work, eyes widening as he recognized the figure walking with the stranger of legend. He bowed his head and watched as they passed, reverent in the silence of the moment. The castle doors opened with no resistance. Courtiers and attendants looked on with awe, but no one rushed forward. There was something in the way they walked, Rapunzel and the prince, something so calm, so deeply grounded, that it stilled all voices. The queen met them at the great hall steps, her hands trembling, her eyes full of tears that glimmered like dew. Rapunzel stood quietly beside the prince. The servants prepared rooms without fanfare, offered food without flourish. The return was not one of triumph. It was one of peace. The prince's sight, though returned, had grown deeper than before. He saw not only with his eyes, but with his heart. And Rapunzel, though new to this world of stone walls and gilded halls, moved through it with ease. She brought with her the rhythm of the forest, slow mornings, long silences, the comfort of steady breath. Together, they began a new chapter. One written in quiet breakfasts, shared smiles, long walks through castle gardens where vines grew free, and laughter floated like wind through trees. They had returned to a world that had gently waited for their kind of stillness. The days that followed their return unfolded gently, like pages turned by a soft breeze. Rapunzel and the prince chose instead the quiet corners of the castle, the sun-warmed stone of the southern gardens, the quiet alcove beside the library hearth, the winding paths beyond the walls where wildflowers still grew untamed. Rapunzel's hair, once her tether to the tower, was no longer a symbol of constraint. She wore it loosely now, often braided with herbs and silk, its length trailing like memory behind her. Children in the village, when they caught sight of her, whispered stories with wide eyes, but when she knelt to speak to them, her voice calm and kind, they soon spoke to her as they would an old friend. The prince resumed his place. He walked the halls with gentle steps, greeted guards by name, and sat quietly in council, listening with the patience he had learned among trees and wind. His rule, when it came, was one of constant steady light. They kept a small cottage at the edge of the castle grounds, just beyond a grove of silver-leaved trees. It was there they spent most evenings, tending a garden where mint and chamomile grew. Rapunzel planted lavender near the door, and its scent drifted through the open windows. Birds nested in the eaves. The forest, though distant, felt near in every branch and breeze. They spoke often of little things. The pattern of moss on stone, the way clouds moved in the high afternoon sky, the softness of a peach just before it ripens. Their days were filled with rituals, morning tea in the sunlight, shared songs on quiet walks, laughter at twilight over meals made with simple care. And each night, as the stars emerged in the clear sky above, Rapunzel would open the window of their cottage and sing. Just a note or two. Her voice had become the sound of home to all who passed nearby. It held a calmness that lingered in dreams, a sweetness that lived in silence. In time, their names became soft legends. People remembered the girl who sang to the trees, and the prince who followed the sound of her voice through every darkness. They were remembered for the gentle way they held the world together. And in that place, surrounded by wildflowers and whispers, they lived, deeply, quietly, and well, rooted not in towers or titles, but in peace. The story of Rapunzel, woven gently through towers and forests, now settles into stillness. Imagine once more the tall, round stone wrapped in ivy, standing quietly among trees. It is empty now, its chamber bathed in light, its window open to the sky. No longer a place of waiting, simply a place the wind passes through, carrying with it echoes of song and sunlight. Below, the forest stretches wide and restful. The trails once traveled in hope are now covered in soft moss and blooms. Every path leads home. The breeze moves through the branches with a hush like breath, as if the trees themselves are falling into slumber. In the distant garden where Rapunzel now walks, lavender sways in the dusk. A candle flickers in the window of a small cottage, casting golden shadows on the walls. Inside, two figures sit together, heads close, the stillness between them full of understanding. Outside, the stars begin to rise. Let your thoughts drift gently over the scenes we've wandered, the longing at the window, the golden braid, the songs that rose like dawn. Let them settle like fallen petals on a quiet pond. There is no need to hold on to the story now. It is here, resting beside you, soft and complete. Close your eyes, if you haven't already. Feel the peace that flows through this old tale, like the turning of a season or the comfort of a familiar voice in the dark. Thank you for joining me on tonight's journey. I hope it brought you a little peace, a little wonder, and a little closer to rest. Until next time, sweet dreams.